All right, great. Let me share my screen here. All right, guys, welcome to the workshop for the Society of Medicine. The way this will work is that for about the first half, I'll present some more, theologically based thoughts on integrating faith and healthcare, just to lay a common foundation for us all. And then Alan and Lisa will lead the second half with more organizational items. And at the end, if we have time, we can do a Q&A. But we have a hard stop at 11 a.m. Eastern time because that's when we need this account for the Society of Public Education talk. So with all that said, let's dive right in. These are the questions I'm basically going to cover today. What is the gospel? What does the gospel have to do with work in general? What does the gospel have to do with healthcare more specifically? How has Christianity transformed healthcare historically? What is the state of healthcare in North America today? And what can Christianity offer healthcare today? And my degree of confidence in what I have to say is like from most confidence at the top to maybe like least confident near the bottom. And that's because like as we start talking more specifically about healthcare, I don't know as much. And that's really why we have this group, so that you guys can explore those topics together. So let's start here. What is the gospel? One of the first problems we have to face in answering that question is that many of us have an overly privatized view of the gospel. So what I mean is sort of philosophically, there's a difference between the concept of private truth and public truth. So stay with me here because this is pretty important to understand. Public truth is a claim about reality that is accepted as true for everyone. Even if it's contested, it's put forward as a truth for everyone to acknowledge. It's a scientific or mathematical or historical truth. The chemical formula for water is H2O. 2 + 2 = 4. On December, in December of 1942, I think, or 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, that sort of thing. But private truth is a lesser kind of truth. Private truth is a claim about reality that might be true for you, but it's not true for me. It's much closer to an opinion, like my favorite color is navy blue. Yes, it's a private truth. It's true for me, but it's not a universal truth. It's not a public truth that's available for everyone. The Christian gospel is not an opinion. It's a claim about reality. It's trying to give an account of human history that we either accept as true or false. Either 2 + 2 is 4 or it's not. And in the same exact way, around the year 33 AD, either a crucified and buried Jewish man named Jesus of Nazareth rose again from the dead in triumph over sin, or he didn't. Either he paid the penalty for sin, or he didn't. Either he ascended to heaven and now rules as Lord of creation, or it's all a lie. So when we think about this question about what is the gospel, we have to keep at the forefront of our mind this idea that the gospel is news. The gospel is the announcement that in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, God has acted decisively to reconcile all things to himself. And this announcement has all sorts of implications. It means that because of Jesus, I am saved from the consequences of my sins, from the tyranny of the devil, from the wrath of God. It means that because of Jesus, human beings can now live in human society together, not on the basis of power and exploitation, but on the basis of mutual service and love. It means that because of Jesus, the final destination of this universe is not destruction and death, but eternal life when heaven and earth are reunited. And so if we believe that the gospel is true, that means that everything about human life has to be rethought from the ground up. And so another way that, maybe a kind of a shorter way we could sum up the gospel is to say that the gospel is the announcement that Jesus is the crucified and risen Lord of the world. And if we're saying that Jesus is Lord, then his lordship has implications for all of life, including for work. So we had a session on this at the first youth conference in 2018. Some of you guys might remember that. I'm not going to go through everything I talked about back then, but I'm going to give kind of like a quick summary of the way the gospel changes the way of the ways the gospel transforms our work. So I took these points again from Tim Keller's book, Every Good Endeavor, which I've mentioned in the past. Let me just run through this real quick. First, the gospel gives you a new identity without which work would crush you. So this is more of a risk if you're in a prestigious profession. If you're in one of like what's called the high status professions, like a lawyer or a doctor, the prestige of the profession passes so deeply into you that it begins to really transform your identity, the way you understand yourself. You feel good about yourself because of what you do for work. It's that kind of job. It tells you who you are. You know you're somebody because no matter what anyone else says, you're a doctor or whatever. And therefore, success or failure in your job can make or break your sense of yourself. See, if you're a restaurant owner, that's a really hard job. But if it fails, as sometimes businesses do, it's for some reason not as psychologically damaging as if you were a doctor and they take your medical license away. And this is how the gospel kind of liberates us from that. The gospel gives us a deep identity, a deep certainty of our worth and value that is not dependent on our performance. If you really believe the gospel, then you know that you enjoy the eternal applause of the source of all power and delight in the entire universe, simply because he loved you enough to give his son for you. When the Father looks at you, he sees Jesus. He sees perfection. So now your identity is not based on what you can achieve. It's based on what you receive from what God has done for you. And paradoxically, knowing this actually liberates you to work free from fear or anxiety and free of pride and arrogance. Second, the gospel gives you a new confidence in the dignity of all work, without which work could bore you. The Protestant reformer Martin Luther really emphasized this idea about the dignity of all work. One example is in Luther's commentary on Psalm 145, where it says, God feeds every living thing. So Luther says, okay, if you're eating today, God is feeding you. But then he explored that a little bit more. Like, how did you get that food? Did you just pray, Lord, give me some food, and then zap, it landed on your plate? No, right? There was a milkmaid who milked the cow. He's talking about Germany in the 1500s, right? So there's a milkmaid who milked the cow. There's a truck driver who transports the milk, like a wagon driver who transports the milk. There's a factory worker who pasteurizes the milk. There's the grocer who sells you the milk. They're all doing God's work to feed you. So Luther makes this case that when the Bible says God is doing certain things for people, like feeding them and making the bars of their gates strong, it's happening through the work of other people. And so what Luther concludes is that all work then is God's work. Every kind of work that contributes to human good, to human flourishing, is God's work. And if all work is God's work, if all kinds of work are God's means of caring for you, then that means that the ultimate way to do a job Christianly is just to do it well. Sometimes people get bitter because the job they have doesn't give them the status they want. But remember, the gospel frees you from the prison of your ego. Because if you believe in the gospel, you believe that you've already inherited everything. So now you're not insecure. The riches of heaven are yours. And so your job is not about feeding your ego. It's about glorifying God and serving your neighbor. So just do a good job. Third, the gospel gives you a moral compass without which work could corrupt you. As our culture becomes more relativistic, people are more willing to cut corners to advance themselves. If they see an opportunity to make a little bit more money by being unethical, and especially if they know no one will watch them and no one will catch them, they take that opportunity. But the gospel means that the Spirit of Christ now lives inside you. You have the ultimate moral compass pointing to true north, Jesus Christ. So Christians now are the people who are not as ruthless, who are unwilling to cut corners to score a better deal for themselves. Fourth, the gospel gives you a new worldview without which work would be your master rather than your servant. So what do I mean by that? There are a whole lot of jobs that can't properly be pursued unless you have an idea of what human beings are for. And as a Christian, you have to bring your Christian faith to bear on that to inform you on how you do your job. And finally, the gospel gives you hope in the midst of frustration, without which work could crush your spirit or frustrate you. Anyone who has worked for even a little while starts to realize that even the best things you do are partial, incomplete, inadequate. And over time, that can start to really wear at you. Did I really do my best in that situation? I wish I could have done more. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58, Paul writes, "Therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." And I've always loved that N.T. Wright, in interpreting that passage, points out that Paul is making this statement at the end of a long passage on the resurrection of Jesus. It's almost as if Paul is saying, look, because of the resurrection of Jesus, the impartial, imperfect things you are working on, if you commit it to the Lord, it's not wasted. God will take the imperfect work of our hands and somehow he'll graciously include it in the divine and eternal kingdom that he's ushering in. So, what does the gospel have to do with healthcare? Well, remember, the gospel in its simplest form is a statement that Jesus is Lord. But then Jesus himself in Matthew chapter 25 makes this amazing statement on the basis on which he rules the world and judges the world as Lord. He separates the righteous from the wicked, the sheep from the goats, based on the way they treated him when he was hungry, thirsty, naked, and in prison. And both the righteous and the wicked asked Jesus, "When did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or in prison?" And Jesus says, "Whenever you did it to the least of these, you did it to me." So yes, I know healthcare is not specifically mentioned in that passage, but Jesus is saying here that he has such solidarity with the poor that when they are served, he is served. And I think that's the ethic that the early church adopted when they cared for the weakest, the most vulnerable, the most marginalized folks in society. That's when they were most serving their Lord and Master. So how did Christianity transform healthcare? Well, you see in history how the church worked out that Matthew 25 thing in real life, especially in the field of medicine and healthcare. So first, the early Christians raised the social status of the weak. The Roman world during the time of the early church was brutal to the weak. Sick people were despised. Infanticide and poisoning of the sick were common practices. But the Christians were different. There's a story about the 2nd century when a pandemic actually hit the city of Carthage in northern Africa. And the Roman pagan households threw those who were sick, even those in their own families, out of their homes and onto the streets to die and survive on their own. And the entire Christian community in Carthage, personally led by their bishop, responded by going out on the streets, offering comfort and taking those sick people into their own homes to be cared for. Centuries later, a Roman emperor named Julian tried to halt the spread of Christianity in the empire and bring back the old pagan religion. And Julian admitted that if the old religion wanted to succeed, it would need to care for people even better than the way Christians cared for people. And that's just a testament to the fact that Christian society, over the course of 350 years, succeeded in changing the way the Roman world looked at the sick, so that now there was an expectation, because of the Christians, that the sick would be taken care of. Second, Christians were pioneers in hospital building. Before Christianity emerged, it's true there were centers to take care of the sick in Buddhist lands. The ancient Greek temples included places where the sick could receive medicine and where they could sleep. And the Romans established some military hospitals to treat their soldiers. But Christians really took things to the next level. In AD 369, Basil, the bishop of Caesarea, founded a 300-bed hospital, which was the first large-scale hospital for the seriously ill and disabled. It cared for victims of the plague. It had hospices for the poor and aged, isolation units, wards for travelers who were sick, and a leprosy house. As time went on, rulers influenced by Christian principles encouraged building of hospitals all over Christian-ruled lands. And finally, Christianity also contributed to medical ethics in spreading the practices of the Greek Hippocratics, which Christians saw, Hippocrates' teachings as in line with Christian teaching. In contrast to pagan doctors who had the power not only to heal, but also kind of the power to kill or poison those they thought weren't deserving of further treatment, Christians adopted the Hippocratic oath, the belief that medicine should only be used to heal and never to harm. So that's kind of how Christianity historically transformed healthcare. What's the status of healthcare in North America today? I'm definitely not an expert in this field, so take what I say here with a huge heaping of salt. But from what I can tell, three trends are happening in North American healthcare that will probably continue on for the foreseeable future, and they pose some challenges for North American society. The first challenge is the commercialization of healthcare. There's been all kinds of work done on how medical professionals are now being transformed into service providers, and patients are being transformed into clients. And that sort of shift in mentality has introduced some odd and sometimes harmful incentives and inequities in the way people receive care when they're sick. But even despite that shift towards commercialization, we have to admit that modern medicine over the last few centuries has been a pretty huge humanitarian success story. In the aggregate, life expectancy has increased considerably. A baby born today has 1/10 the risk of dying in infancy compared to a baby born in 1900. And a lot of this is due to more advanced health technology. But as technology continues to advance, there are going to be new ethical questions that will be raised in this century that will need to be answered. So will we be able to engineer our offspring to make them smarter, more athletic, and more attractive? Will we be able to incorporate cybernetics into our bodies to gain, sometimes it might be for like therapeutic treatments, but in other cases, it might be for cybernetic enhancements. Will we learn to reverse aging and extend life to be significantly longer? And even if we are able to do such things, should we do such things? These are questions that I think the health professions are going to have to wrestle with as technology continues to advance. And finally, the more attention that's paid to the social determinants of health, the more it becomes apparent that differences in class, race, education, and geography have an outsized impact on the actual health of different populations. And this can reveal some ugly things about the advantages of the rich and powerful compared to the poor and vulnerable. So how can we apply Christian principles to healthcare? The truth is, I don't have any answers to any of those questions I just raised. But I believe that the gospel still applies in these new situations, just as it has applied in the old situations. And it's my hope that this group will dedicate itself to not just answering these questions intellectually, but actually working out those answers in practice. Because that's what real Christian mission means. It means living out the gospel in tangible, embodied ways that shares with the world a foretaste of the kingdom of God. So to that end, I recommend that for this first year, at a minimum, before you do anything else, you guys start by studying a book together to try and make sure that this group has a firm common theological foundation. And the book I want to recommend that you study this next year is In the Company of the Poor by Gustavo Gutierrez and Paul Farmer. Gutierrez is one of the founders or first articulators of liberation theology from Latin America, and Farmer is the founder of Partners in Health, a well-respected nonprofit healthcare organization. And this book is about how liberation theology in particular can inform the provision of healthcare in today's world. So that concludes really what I had to share with y'all today. Let me turn it over now to Alan and Lisa, and if we have time at the end, we can take some questions.
Hey everyone, hope you guys can hear me. My name's Alan, for those of you who I have not met or don't know. I've been communicating with a couple of you here and there about this particular group. I know some of you have texted me, asking me questions about it. So hopefully we'll kind of clear some things up with this. This presentation is relatively short. I know we're limited on time here, but we just wanted to cover some of the business aspects of this group, like logistics wise and what we're going to be doing and what our goals are. Lisa's also going to be presenting with us. We're going to be sharing some of the slides. You can contact me, Lisa, or Jerome. Jerome's also been involved in kind of getting this group started. So we'll go ahead and get started. Go to the next slide, Brian. All right. So Brian touched on this a little bit, this idea of liberation theology, and hopefully you guys read that or read the article or watched that 15-minute video about Father Gustavo Gutierrez and what he's done for the community and his idea of liberation theology. And long story short, basically the idea that the poor are disadvantaged in many ways. The Bible talks a lot about preferential treatment for the poor, all about Jesus, and Jesus's ministry and how it's revolved around those who are disadvantaged. And if you think about it in the healthcare society, like whether you're a physician or a nurse or pharmacist or whatever it is, even if you're in the public health care sector, a lot of the patients that we encounter, a lot of the policies that we develop are revolved around helping those who are disadvantaged, either disadvantaged economically, so the poor, and oftentimes, like, because of those things, they're also physically, mentally, spiritually and emotionally also disadvantaged. They have a lack of resources because they may not have the money to fund or the money or the education to get those resources. Oftentimes they don't have insurance, things like that. So as healthcare professionals, like, these are the people that we see the most and the people that we encounter the most. And the idea of liberation theology is all about preferential treatment to the poor, so that by serving these individuals, we can kind of create an avenue for spiritual conversations and kind of get them in touch with God that way, spark those conversations, and hopefully the goal is to liberate them and bring them towards God. Next slide, Brian. So this particular group, we have some short-term goals and some long-term goals. One thing that we thought about was creating a reading assignment. So like we talked about in The Company of the Poor, the book that Brian brought up, which we'll talk about in a second here, but we wanted to create a theological foundation for our group so that we have some sort of motivation behind why we're doing this. So to get that understanding, we were going to follow this book for the rest of the calendar year, kind of read it together and do a little discussion each time we have a meeting. And we'll get to the meetings in a second. The other short-term goal we have is to elect a committee. We want, like, as a general body of this entire group, to kind of create a committee that can kind of spearhead things in different, in different directions, and kind of like have a governing body for this organization so we can kind of get things done. And the other short-term goal is to network and recruit more members into SOM. We're all about strength in numbers. Healthcare is always about strength in numbers. So we want to be able to touch different aspects of healthcare, all different professions, kind of bring them in together, and then also network. And I've talked to a couple of you about that. And I know some of you guys have connections all over the country into international mission work and things like that, to kind of get this, to kind of help us branch out and kind of and fulfill our goals. And then long term is to establish national and international mission work. So we want to reach out to our local communities and eventually international, maybe even create a mission field in India or expand on the mission field that CSI already has there, and kind of do our work that way. And then we also want to be an established subgroup of CSI. So, like, we want our members to support each other. So everyone in this group is at a different phase in their life. Some of us are, in school right now. Some of us have already finished and are, practicing careers. Some of us are just thinking about, what we want to do. So we have people in different phases, but we need to be able to connect with each other, network with each other, and help each other out. I know some people have already reached out to me personally, people who are interested in medicine or whatever, and I've kind of given them some resources that I've experienced or gotten them in touch with people that may be able to help them out. So things like that, like, we need to be able to interconnect with each other, build each other up, make us better at what we do, but also at the same time use our skills to help our local and international communities. Brian, next one. All right.
Okay, so we're gonna have quarterly meetings in a calendar year, so that'd be every 3 months. And in those meetings, we would be discussing the reading assignment from the book that we were proposing to talk about. And so probably just have a discussion about that, and then talk about news and updates pertaining to the group itself. So anything coming up or anything that we should be looking out for soon, that would be talked about during the meetings. And then also we were planning to have a guest speaker, whether it's inside this group, if there's maybe a specific topic that someone in this group is kind of knows more about. Maybe they could lead like a little bit of a discussion or kind of like teach us a little bit more about something that we can take into our own workplace. And then whether it's inside this group or someone outside of this group, I know Alan mentioned that there's a lot of people in this group that have a lot of connections to different people. So maybe bringing them in and kind of talking about their experience and how we can use that in our own group, and or possibly have a workshop. So different things that we talk about or planning to do in this group, we can kind of build on that during this time too. And then lastly, just talk about the goals for the next meeting and what we can kind of think about during the course of the months throughout the year until we meet again.
So this is the book that Bryan had mentioned, In the Company of the Poor, by Dr. Paul Farmer and Father Gustavo Gutierrez. Basically, it just expands on the idea of liberation theology. So we wanted to like divide this book into 4 parts, and we'll kind of give you guys, and obviously this book can be found, you know, on Amazon or whatever, however you choose to get it. I'm sure it's at your local library too, but we wanted to divide it into 4 parts, and then just during each quarterly meeting, we'd just kind of briefly discuss it. Make sure we're all kind of on the same page, bring out any thoughts or questions about what we read. And that'll kind of give us this like theological foundation so that we have something to motivate us to be productive in this group.
Okay, so something that Alan kind of touched on was possibly starting a committee amongst this group, just so we can have people to kind of like look after certain things and make sure this group is running smoothly and making sure that we're just checking in what's happening in our development in this group. So some of the positions that we kind of have been thinking about was obviously a president, kind of just to look over everything, making sure like the group is going okay, and just to see if there's anything maybe we can like touch upon. And then vice president kind of works hand in hand with president usually, but also they'd be maybe in charge of like sending out emails or updates in the group just to know what's going on. And then we wanted to have like a local and international philanthropy type of position. So people, maybe a person that could kind of like look out for anything going on in the US and that we can maybe look towards working on. And then I know there's a bunch of people that have a lot of connections to international things as well. They've done a lot of mission trips outside of the US. So some of them kind of coordinate that as well. And then we wanted to have a position kind of for recruitment, so just bringing in more people into this group, and also member development and making sure everyone's actually gaining something in this group and making sure no one's staying, you know, kind of like distant or like not really involved. So just kind of checking up on people. And the last position that we were thinking of is communication and social media. It's kind of making sure that the word is out there and that people are knowing what's going on in this group, and we're kind of just spreading the news to different people.
Also, the other thing that we were thinking about is we wanted to, like, there were some people that brought up the idea of creating a different name, a group name, or a group name suggestion. So if we can do this within the grouping itself, so if people have ideas of like what they'd want to rename, maybe like more of a like an all-encompassing name for the group or something like that. We wanted to open that up to the group itself and have people suggest, and then we can create like a poll or something like that so that we can vote on that. And then those of you who have not responded to the questionnaire, please do so. I know some people just got added to the group. I will send out email or the questionnaire to those who had just emailed us. And then obviously you guys can contact us at any time, all 3 of us. But in terms of the committee itself, like we wanted to have everyone to have an equal opportunity to run for any of those positions if they're interested. And then we would elect them, you know, like as a general body kind of a thing, and then kind of go from there. So does anyone, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I just want to touch on one thing for the committees, or the committee. We were just kind of talking about how we can kind of form that committee maybe later on when there's a bit more people in this group and people kind of having a sense of like how each person's personality is and what they would be fit for. So that committee idea is kind of something that we can kind of like touch on or like expand on like over time. So that's nothing coming up too soon, but just so that you guys know, that's something that we've been talking about and thinking about.
One thing I want to touch on also was this group is it's an informal group. If you guys have questions about like your careers or your education or like where to go or resources, feel free to post in the group. Like there are going to be people in that group that have those experiences or have already been through those things, and you can direct message them or message them in the group or whatever you want. And this is like an open forum kind of thing. Like whatever concerns you have, you can bring up in the group, or any suggestions you have, you can bring up in the group. If you guys know people that could possibly help us out, I know a couple of people have already contacted me about international mission work, and they have certain connections, and so like they've already reached out to me about that, like, and so those are things that we can move forward in those directions. But feel free to like bring up any of those concerns. Does anyone have any questions about the group, or like if they have any suggestions so far?
If anyone doesn't feel comfortable maybe talking right now, just feel free to reach out to any one of us, me, Jerome, or Alan, and we can kind of like help you explain something or make you feel more comfortable being in the group, understanding something that you didn't get before. So just feel free to reach out to any of us, if not now.
There was also a couple of concerns that people thought about this being as a big time commitment, and that interfering with their school or work or whatever. But just know that like this group is relatively fluid. So like, I mean, they're only quarterly meetings, and I understand that everyone has like sometimes you can have a rough schedule or a rough patch of the year where you're really busy, but just be as involved as you can, and like just the big thing is to recruit as many people as we can, so that we do have that strength in numbers. So if we do have during the school year when we have some people being more busy, then others can kind of step in their place and kind of contribute to the group. So and if anyone else has any doubt, like this group is open to anyone who's interested in medicine, healthcare, mental health, public health sector. Any of those things are wide open to this group, just because it's there's just so much that we can all do together, and I'm sure that everyone can kind of contribute. So, Jerome, you got anything to add?
I mean, you guys covered it all.
Okay, great. Just want to, any questions or feedback or comments? Give a last chance for people to share, even if it's just good job, Alan and Lisa.
Good job, Alan and Lisa. No, this is really exciting. Like, I'm excited for it. It definitely is a great avenue to use what we know, like what we learn outside of church. Because for me, something I've always struggled with is like, what does my outside like work life have to do with the things I learn in church, and like how does it apply and how does it all come together? And I think this is definitely the first step toward using what we believe to affect the things that we do outside of church, and the way we see, for any medical worker, patients, or how does your theological belief affect that, how you see them, how you treat them. And yeah, I think this is great. So awesome job.
I think oftentimes oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think oftentimes like business, like the business aspect of things gets in the way of healthcare, and we focus so much on the money and like what we can and can't do. But this kind of gives us like a little bit of a break from that, so that we can following the rules or the money and the insurance and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like kind of similar to you, Stacey. I was kind of like, I had no idea what this group even like was about or anything. So just going, I mean, I'm starting, so I haven't really stepped into the program yet, but this is just it's a good way to kind of like just think about things throughout the program and how I can kind of tie in what I know in church, and like, you know, with this group, it's just a great way to like kind of branch out, you know, even.
Hey, Alan, Lisa, Jerome. I know that it's already been said, but great job, because I know it's got to be intimidating, especially like starting something that's brand new and not knowing, you know, attention it's going to draw or not. I'm really excited as an older youth because I wish there was something like this when I was starting out. I think it's also great, even for those of us who've maybe been in our fields a little bit, just as far as things that we might be doing right already, but also things that we might be doing wrong, that you guys as younger youth may actually have insight on different things we could tackle. You know, and when it comes to incorporating faith, it's everything from like praying with patience to your perspective, to, you know, managing your work in your field, as well as your interaction with your coworkers. Because, you know, in order to maintain your job, you do get judged based on productivity. But the flip side to that is, if you provide quality of care that is rooted in your faith, I think this is awesome. I'm really excited for what we can do. I know that, you know, in our church especially, we've got a lot of high school youth who are kind of looking into different careers, whether they want to or their parents want them to go into a health profession. So, you know, I know that you guys have kind of formal committee titles, but especially for younger youth, it might be a little intimidating. So I think just constantly pushing the fact that everybody would be working together, as opposed to just one person doing, you know, their job description and being counted on for updates, I think. So I know that some of our youth are a little scared. And so we just continue to try to reassure them that we're always behind them, you know, helping them succeed, if you will. But I'm really excited. I can't wait to see what comes.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like there were a lot of people that reached out to me as well that were kind of like starting college or like starting their, like, kind of didn't know like what this group really was for, who it was for in particular. And I know a lot of people were kind of like, I don't know if I know what I want to do yet, but I was thinking about healthcare. So there's a lot of people like that. And I just feel like just bringing them into meetings and just, or like just when we have like a workshop or a guest speaker, just so they know like what kind of the vision of this group is and kind of where they can see themselves, like when they do end up deciding to do healthcare or a different field, kind of just implementing that in their own careers. So yeah, I've gotten a lot of people who are kind of like, I don't know if this is for me, or like, I don't know how much time I can commit even during like a program. So we just kind of been like reminding them like, this is like voluntary, on your own time. And so that you think you can contribute to the group, like that's kind of what we're looking for, and kind of just making sure everyone's comfortable. But thank you for that. That's actually really good advice. Definitely look out for that and think about that.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, feedback? We're pretty new at this, so like whatever you guys can contribute would be gold. All right.
Okay, it seems like everyone's had their questions sort of addressed for now. But as Alan and Lisa mentioned, please feel free to reach out to them or to Jerome or to me if you have any questions about this. I'm also very excited about this. I think there's a lot of good fruit that's going to come from this. It's just the beginning. So thanks, Alan and Lisa, for putting the presentation together. You guys did a great job.